every day in 100 different ways, some seen, some unseen, the government manages to take away your freedom and to take away your property. Welcome to Freedom Watch. It's our job to tell you what the government has done, to invite you to participate via email, and to listen to those of us who professionally and for a living are devoted to the Constitution, to civil liberties, and to the free market. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano. It's 2 o'clock in New York City. It's 11 in the morning on the West Coast. It's Wednesday. It's time for Freedom Watch. Our Freedom Watch regulars are here. Lew Rockwell from the Von Mises Institute is with us on the telephone. Tracy Burns from the Fox Business Network is seated next to me. Next to Tracy is Peter Schiff from Euro Pacific Capital. And joining us from our Washington, D.C. Bureau, joining us from Capitol Hill itself, from the seat of the government, is Congressman Ron Paul. Congressman, welcome back. We appreciate so much your Wednesdays with us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
What did we do right or what did we do wrong that this $410 billion piece of legislation made its way through? Mrs. Pelosi having said to your colleagues in the Senate, don't change one scintilla of it, or it won't make its way back here, or the House won't consider those changes. Is that any way to run the government?
Well, it is a way to run the government, not a very good way to run the government. But, you know, there was a lot of talk. I think this was a subject we talked about last week, and you were wondering how long it would take to get it through, and it went through. And you realize it was finally passed on voice vote. So all that talk and posture and all these things really wasn't much. They couldn't change it. They wouldn't change it. The rules prevented it. It was 410. It's stuff that should have been passed or dealt with last year. It shouldn't have ever been passed. But no, it represents how much government is out of control. And even with this $410 billion, which is huge, I keep arguing it still doesn't address the subject of the trillions of dollars that the Congress has no right to investigate. And that is the trillions of dollars of credit that the Federal Reserve creates and passes out to their friends. They have no responsibility to tell us. So this is horrible. The TARP funds was horrible. But the bigger problem is still the control of the monetary system through the Federal Reserve, because they are a fourth branch of government. They're every bit as powerful as the Congress. And I'm just baffled on why the system works as well as it does.
I want to get to the Federal Reserve in a minute, but one additional question on the $410 billion package. And maybe this goes to the human heart. I don't know. You're an expert on the human heart as well as the ways of Congress because you're a physician. Is there no shame among members of Congress who vote on legislation as to which there have been no committee hearings, no meaningful debate, and which they've never read, but yet which commits the American taxpayer to expenditures of money for the borrowing for which they will be paying back for the next 30 years? Is there no shame against those who've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, and yet they would write laws in this Soviet style of writing legislation?
I would say no, there is no shame. Those who can't do anything about it, an individual like myself, I can't change anything, so I certainly don't feel any shame. The others who participated and have the control, they say, well, this is business as usual. We have to argue and explain that it has happened the last 8 years as well. So it's not just a democratic thing. It's a system thing. It's ingrained in the way we have done business here. But no, not shame. They don't, and none of them ever feel like, oh, I didn't uphold my oath of office today. Maybe I'll apologize or ask for forgiveness. Never. The way they interpret things, it is just fine. Some people have been taught that this is the way politics has to work. Otherwise, we don't get anything done. The bill wouldn't have gotten passed if he would have allowed debate. So they rationalize it pretty well, and they've been taught in school that the Constitution is a living, breathing document, and they have a right to do what they want under their interpretation. So there's no guilt, and there's no shame.
Is the resistance either from other members of Congress? Well, I know what the resistance is from the Fed. They don't want anybody to know what they're doing. What is the resistance from your colleagues on the Hill to your proposed legislation to audit the Fed? I mean, in the Clinton years, a liberal Democrat, I can't remember the person's name, proposed comparable legislation, and the White House said no. Who could possibly, unless you're on the Fed and you want your nefarious ways hidden from the public, who in Congress could possibly oppose auditing the Fed?
Not too many, just a few insiders who understand and defend the Fed and believe in that system. I think there's a lot of support for at least auditing and opening up and making the Fed transparent, even without addressing the subject of what should they be doing and should it even exist. But no, there's a strong sentiment here, and I'm getting supporters for this 1207, which is just asking for transparency. And I think the time is right. Before, when the Fed was doing these miraculous things and creating this great, wonderful bubble and everybody was wealthy, nobody cared. But now they do care. This is one thing I think the sentiment has changed. And if we do our job right, me in particular, and get other members of people and get the public to ask their members of Congress to support this, I think we will continue to make inroads on this. And I think it's bipartisan, too. So there's a little bit of optimism there about pushing the issue of transparency for the Fed.
Well, it's Tracy Burns. Interesting to me that John McCain is back in the saddle again, trying to be the maverick on this. Is he going to make any headway with this $410 billion bill?
Oh, no, I think that's passed, and I don't consider, and I don't want to get into that fight, but I think that was a little bit of grandstanding that was going on. But no, he didn't make any headway, and there's probably a lot of things in that bill that he was quite happy with. But no, he had his chance last week. He did make some political points, but no real changes. Of course, he doesn't have the votes either. I mean, the Democrats have the vote. They really now, with a couple Republicans, are actually able to cut off the filibuster. So even if the Republicans are acting better, and they don't have the votes, either in the House or right now in the Senate. It doesn't look like a conservative, fiscal, responsible senator has much to say about this either.
Told us last week that the Republicans in the House and the Republicans in the Senate, almost all of them in the Senate who voted against this, did not suddenly read the Constitution or did not suddenly find their love of the free market. They just wanted to stick their eye or their thumb in the eye of their Democratic colleagues. And I think that some of the Republicans who voted against it are secretly happy that this passes because from their point of view, they get the best of all worlds. They get to make a free market stance which energizes and pleases their base, but they also get to spend money, which almost everybody except you and the people that are close to you in the government likes to do, so that they can boast about bringing home the bacon. Am I misreading this?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot like that. I think there's a handful of senators that wouldn't fit into that category. I think most of them would sort it out and say, well, maybe I could cut 10% if I really had the opportunity. But coming from my viewpoint and a strict interpretation of the Constitution, I'm not talking about 10%. I'm talking like about 70 or 80% is what we need if we really were back to a constitutional government. But for the most part, there's a lot of partisanship going on and pragmatism, and they switch. And now it's great for conservatives to pander to their base and say, look, it's only the Democrats. It's the Democrats' fault. That's why we're in all this mess.
And Peter Schiff, did you happen to see Bernanke's speech the other day for the Center for Foreign Relations?
I saw part of that.
Yeah, it was interesting that he started his speech by actually delivering a pretty good explanation of how this crisis came about. He talked about the roots of it being in the global economic imbalances and the fact that Americans don't save enough and that we borrowed a lot of money and we borrowed it from abroad and then we wasted the money. We didn't invest it productively, we spent it. And so he identified the key of the problem, and then he seemed to imply that we needed another government agency or more government involvement to make sure that that the booms don't get too big, so that they can temper the boom and bust cycles and try to make sure that we don't get this type of misuse of credit. When the very irony of it is the only reason that happened was because of the monetary policy that he and his predecessors supplied us with, and he seems to think that we need another government agency to counteract the damage being done by the Fed.
Yeah, he wants it both ways. He wants to control the money supply and create a bubble and make everybody seem to be prosperous. But he knows that there's imbalances that come from that policy. But instead of questioning his own policy, he defends that because he lives with it. That's what his whole life has been about. So then he says, only if we had a regulator. Of course, from our viewpoint, if you had sound money, there is always a regulator. It's called the marketplace. You don't have all the banks, going broke at one